And yeah, nice to be in Zimbabwe. I flew out of Johannesburg yesterday morning. It was 11 degrees and cloudy, and I thought, I'm going to nice, warm Zimbabwe, and I'm disappointed. But anyway, it's better than 11 degrees. Try and get this thing going. All right, so I've got the graveyard shift. I think you're all looking forward to something cold outside. So bear with me. I'll get you through the last hour. I've got lots of pictures. So they asked me to speak on biosecurity. Biosecurity can be a very important part of your business, but it can be quite a serious part. So we're going to try and not be too serious. As soon as we get the presenter talk, because I'm not speaking about running on the beach, unfortunately. All right. Okay, so I'm speaking biosecurity, but I'm using ASF, African swine fever, as an example, and I'm going to be using African swine fever's effect around the world, particularly in China, over the last few years, as an example. And then at the end, I'll get onto more nitty-gritty biosecurity on the farm, and hopefully you can take something home from that. I'm going to start with that slide. There was once a man without a problem in the world, then he bought a pig. It's apparently a proverb from Eastern Europe, and I saw that, and I don't know, I just thought it's so true. So I guess I'm speaking to people with lots of problems today. It's not easy like chickens and cattle. Okay, so let's start with China. You've all heard that China had an African swine fever outbreak, and it affected the whole world. Before I carry on, these first few slides, I've got a lot of different references stuck in here, and I'm not going to go through all of them. So it looks like a lot of writing. Don't panic. I'm going to speak about the important stuff. I just put it all in that it is there for reference, so if you want to go and have a read. Why was China so vulnerable? Why did it have such a big effect? And I think the main reason is that half of the world's pigs at that stage were Chinese. Every second pig on the planet spoke Chinese. 442 million pigs just before the African swine fever outbreak. So it's a lot of pigs in one place. And what made that worse is that very few of those farms are commercial with commercial levels of biosecurity. You can read there 26 million pig farms across China, and most of those are about 20 sow herds. So it's small scale pig production. I've actually had the privilege of going to China a few times, and the one time I did about a 600 kilometer trip on a train, one of these speed trains. So you do 600 kilometers in 2 hours. Through the Chinese countryside, and you just stare out the window, and the whole way it was just small piece of ground, maybe 1 hectare, with rice, a pig, a duck, next one, rice, pig, duck, next one, rice, pig, chicken, next one, rice, pig, chicken. So it's small scale farming. There's no fences, there's no showers, and that's why this spread so effectively through China. Very, very few big commercial operators. Okay, so 1st of August 2018 is when it started. China reported a outbreak, and the government apparently was really quick on responding and did lots of testing, but it wasn't enough. And I'm going to skip that because I can talk about all of that on this picture, and I prefer pictures. So the pointer unfortunately doesn't point on this screen. Can I take this with me? Sorry, I'm making your life very difficult. I just use some violence or what? You see, you just need to use some violence. All right. What's that? Yeah, but it's a LED. Does it point there? Oh. Didn't point on the LED screen. Okay, so the initial outbreak happens here, kind of in the middle of China. And 2 weeks later, everyone thinks it's quiet. And then 2 weeks later, there's an outbreak here, something like 1,500 kilometers away. And the interesting thing is that outbreak comes from the red area. So that pig starts its life in the red area. it's transported down to that bottom blue area. So that pig moves like 3,000 kilometers and infects the area down at the bottom there. And that's what's concerning about pigs and disease, is pigs can be transported big distances. In our part of the world, they fit in taxis, they fit in cars, they fit on the back of vehicles. I've seen a pig very comfortable on the back seat of a Toyota Corolla. And that Corolla can drive far. So we can move these diseases very quickly. And what happens when a farmer there with 20 sows has got pigs dying? Sells the rest of them as quickly as he can. Okay, because you're going to have complete loss. So you sell them and they go to wherever they go. That pig that came from the red area down to the blue was actually not a farm that was trying to get rid of pigs. That was his normal market. Okay, that pig was getting slaughtered across the other side of the country just because there were more abattoirs in the bottom here, and that northern part wasn't really a pig producing area. So it spread really fast. And then you can see all the little stars. Then it just went wild. And then it's your neighboring countries, and then it's kind of most of the rest of the world. Few areas still have only had a few breaks and have got it under control. Very few countries have had nothing. I think one of the main last man standing is the United States market that is still unaffected. But they're running scared and are spending huge money with many other countries on trying to develop a vaccine. At this stage, there is no vaccine. People have been trying to make a vaccine for many, many years, and it's obviously more difficult than certain other viruses. But United States is still unaffected. I went to a Congress in the United States a year and a half or 2 years ago, and 3/4 of the Congress was about African swine fever. They don't even have it, okay? Because they know what this is going to have an effect on their industry. They export 20% of their pork, and they produce a lot of pork. So if they get ASF and the border's closed, 20% of that pork won't be exported. It'll flood their market, and the whole industry will have a serious economic effect on the whole industry. And then there's a few other parts of the world that have it under control, so to say. Western Europe's had a few breaks, but so far so good. But I think the whole world, outside of Africa and bits of Russia, I think the whole world are panicking or in full panic because they've already got it about ASF. I say except Africa and Russia because those are traditionally where we've had African swine fever for quite a long time. African swine fever moved into Georgia and those parts of the world and Russia 20, 30 years ago. They've been dealing with it for a long time. And it's a disease that's endemic here. So Africa's always had it. And to a certain extent, I think deals with it maybe slightly better than countries that don't know it. Although many countries in Africa simply have very, very low pig numbers because of African swine fever. People have learned it's hard to farm pigs. Every few years, all your pigs die, so they don't farm pigs. And hence, not very much pork throughout Africa, except for certain countries where Uganda's caught quite a lot, South Africa's got quite a lot. But it's all about how you're controlling, how to farm in an ASF positive country. All right, so back to China. So then in 2021, so they had the initial break in 2018, lots of pigs died. We'll get a little bit more to that, but pretty much half of China's pigs died. And I already told you that every second pig on the planet was speaking Chinese. So that's 25% of the world's pigs. All the pigs in the world, 25% are dead. And you can imagine what massive effect that has on protein production, and there's this big hole left, hungry people that are going to eat something. Then in 2021, there's kind of a second wave. Everyone's thinking, oh, this is getting better. China starts putting sows back in, and then there's a second wave that comes through. And that one's really been, and then another 10 million sows disappear. And that one's really been blamed on different strains of African swine fever. There was a lot of talk of different viruses, new viruses, and there's still a certain amount of confusion about it. But it sounds pretty much like there are different strains of African swine fever now in China, and this is a man-made problem. So you would have pharmaceutical companies with limited knowledge, and they would try to make a live vaccine. So guys would take the virus, they had enough knowledge to take the virus, take a gene out of the virus, make a live vaccine with that virus, thinking that, okay, this won't be pathogenic, and they've solved it, and they'll go and inject pigs with that live vaccine. Meantime, the gene that came out there didn't make much difference to how strongly that, or how well that virus can kill a pig. And now you're left, because it's a live vaccine, now you're left with a second African swine. We've always only had one strain of this virus. At a congress a few months ago, there was a speaker from Spain who had proof in his hand that from one farm in China, they got 5 different African swine fever strains. So now the problem just gets bigger, because now when some clever person does finally find the vaccine for African swine fever, you're going to have one for each strain, presumably. You might not get cross-protection from one vaccine. So, yeah, China then battled with phase 2, and since then, they're still battling. There's far fewer pigs in China. It's made a comeback, but it isn't up to its original level. And the Chinese are also farming with African swine fever now. So if a big herd gets it, they don't go in and kill all the pigs, because pigs have, I'll talk about that now, but pigs have become really expensive because of the shortage. So they call it pulling teeth. They'll go into the unit and see, okay, here's a pig with African swine fever, take it and its pen mates out, get rid of them, and then hold thumbs that it hasn't spread anywhere else. And as you start getting cases, just keep taking out. Now, that's hard. We've had cases in, actually it was in Malawi a few years ago, where we had a case in a dry sow building, and we got rid of all the sows on that farm, and we managed to isolate the weaner growers, and they never broke. So it is possible to stop it from going from one side of the farm to another, but then there must be no movement, no rats, no people moving, and then you still just got to be lucky. So China's trying everything they can, desperate times, right? Okay, so as I said earlier, it's pretty much killed off 50% of the Chinese pig population. They estimate that that's worth $130 billion US. So I can't think of a number that big. So it's a lot. I mean, I don't think, someone was describing to me the other day, what's the difference between $1 million and $1 billion? He says, no one understands it. He's a cash in transit guy. He says a beer crate, one of those crates that you put quartz in, he says, if you fill that with 200 Rand notes, that's R1 million. He says, but then you need 1,000 of those, is $1 billion. So he says they put R1 million in a beer crate, and he says R1 billion is a 30-ton truck full of beer crates. That kind of is, whoa, we always think million, billion, it's a few more noughts, all right. $130 billion US, it's big money. Okay, but like I said, China wasn't only producing half the pigs in the world, they were also eating half the pigs in the world. Okay, so all of a sudden there wasn't enough protein, and that's where the rest of the world, the ones that could, unfortunately, Africa didn't take part, but the ones that could then jumped in and said, yeah, we'll supply you. And that had an effect on many countries, and I'll talk about that. So this graph, the blue ones show how the Chinese pork production crashed year on year there. You can see the big crashes down in 2019, 2020. Interestingly, the other graphs, a red one is beef. You can see beef isn't easy just to quickly turn on the tap. It's a slower process. So you can see beef didn't make too much of a change. But look what poultry came to the party there in grey, and they said, thanks very much, we'll fill that hole. People want protein, there's no pork, they'll eat chicken. So all of a sudden, China started producing a lot more chicken. They took the opportunity, and then started the bar graph on the far right. That's China's meat imports. And you can see those last two there, how it just spiked. So China just started sucking the world dry of protein, and many countries took advantage. The main one, the blue one there, is the EU and the UK, but that was mainly Germany and Spain that were rigged to, health-wise and logistics-wise, were rigged to actually get pork moved to China. So they made up the most of it. But then you can see in red the USA, Canada, Brazil, all the big pork players got on board and increased their exports to China. Why? Because the price had gone through the roof. Okay, pork price had gone through the roof, and people wanted to make some money. Chatting to a American guy a while ago, they've got three 2,000 sow farms in China. American company, but they kind of play in the Chinese market. And I said to him, and now? He said, no, they'd lost 2 of the sites. So 2 sites broke to ASF, they still had 1. So I said to him, are you repopping or what are you doing? He said, no, they don't know. They still haven't worked out how they broke, so they're too scared to put pigs back in at this stage. But he said that 1 unit is making more than the other 3 did altogether. So they're happy just to keep with the 1 for now. Profits are good. Okay, so that's a bit small there, and there's a lot to read. So I'm just going to go through the most important. So it's, why did it spread so fast? And if I read this, it sounds like it could be our region's problems as well. Why did it spread so fast? Lack of knowledge about the disease. Lack of timely notification. Lack of response from the state. So people don't want to talk about it, and the state isn't told about it. And then when the state is told about it, the reaction's a bit slow. So the disease runs faster than the humans respond to it. And then the story about selling sick pigs. So as soon as the pigs are sick, move them. And that happens very commonly. No compensation to the person whose pig has got ASF. That same Spanish guy I was talking about at that Congress, he was part of, Spain had ASF many years ago, and they're one of the only countries that got completely rid of African swine fever. And he mentioned in his talk, I thought was interesting, is no country has ever got rid of ASF unless they compensated the farmers, because people look after their businesses and they move pigs. Okay, so that's interesting. And most countries these days don't compensate. There's very few countries that will compensate. Governments don't have money for that kind of thing. It was mentioned this morning in that first talk, or the second talk, ideal world, you're going to get compensated. Realistically, we're not. We are every man for himself. So that just makes biosecurity that much more important. You've got an asset, you need to look after your asset. All right, last one on the list there is just the infection of feral pigs and wild boars. So it's endemic here. You all know the story. We've got it in warthogs, bush pigs, and there is that called a salvific cycle that holds it, but the spread from those animals to pigs isn't that effective. Where ASF really gets going is when feral pigs pick it up, and feral pigs spread it that much better, more effectively to our pigs. And yeah, I think South Africa's crossed that line recently, where it's in the feral population, more and more people living peri-urban, just around the big cities. You see more and more pigs in those communities, and if swine fever's there, it's there. I don't see how one gets rid of it. Again, you have to protect your asset. We visualize every pig that we see outside of our fences as positive. We presume positive for everything, including African swine fever, because it's the only way to keep yourself clean is just presume everything else is infected. Right, that we chatted about, the compensation. I put this one in maybe for a bit of a different reason. We'll talk about it. But so on the left there, you can see the different colors are different world populations in 2017. And the top light blue one is China. So, right, that's why we're talking about China and ASF and this big global effect. If this outbreak had happened in Namibia, no one would be talking about it, all right? But such a big population, 1.4 billion people, is going to have a big effect on the world market, all right? But the second thing about this graph, what's very interesting for me, is if you look at African countries here, on the left, the only country we've got in the top 10 most populated countries is the pink one there, which is Nigeria. This one over here. And I see it's listed there as 210 or something million people, but by all accounts, Nigeria is already over 300. But look how Nigeria grows. So the graph on the right shows the predictions for the year 2100. And Nigeria then has 800 million people, second most populated country on the planet. You can see how China is already dropping, and China goes from 1.4 billion right down to half of that, 700 million. But the scary thing on this graph is in 2100, there's 5 African countries in the top 10 there. So we've got Nigeria in there, we've got Ethiopia, we've got Egypt, we've got Tanzania, we've got the Congo. Not many of those countries are self-sufficient for protein at this stage. So you look at that and think that's scary. I think the audience we've got here hopefully you look at that and think there's opportunities ahead of us. All right? Someone's going to want to eat pork. More pork. Okay, this maybe puts also just into perspective why China had such a big effect. Let's start with that blue line. This is now meat consumed. What's that? The last 50 years. So the blue line, Europe, slow growth, and for the last 20 years, very static. The orange one, North America, kind of just slow growth, keeps plodding along. The yellow one is Asia and Central America, starting to pick up at the end there, as is, sorry, the yellow one is the rest of Asia. Central and South America is the green one, both the grey one, very similar. Look at us there, the green ones, really lagging behind on how much meat is consumed. Upward trend, but lagging behind. And then at the bottom there, India. Now, you look at the red one of China, and you think, yeah, okay, China, the explosion, the population explosion. But over this time is post-China's population explosion. So that very first talk this morning about how China changed economically, that's that. That's socio-economic change. People can afford meat, so they eat meat. It's not that there's more people, there's actually less people. They're just eating more meat. Compare the red line to India. Remember now, India is about to pass or has just passed China in the most people in the world. And look at their line. And that just shows socio-economics. So it's interesting. Africa is doubling in the next 30 years. That's already going to call for more protein. Socio-economically, are we going to get stronger? If so, that green graph could turn up quite sharply. Again, opportunity. But yeah, the graph was actually about the red one. You can see how China had just skyrocketed, and then all of a sudden, no protein. To make that situation worse, that circle on the top right, that circle shows China, and of that meat, what are they eating? The light blue one is pork. So you can see a big, half of what they're eating almost is pork. The little circle down on Africa there, the bottom one, the size also shows how much meat, right? But that little circle is us, sub-Saharan Africa, and you can see that tiny little sliver of light blue there. So not eating a lot of pork. Again, surely there's opportunity. All right, I spoke a little bit about the pork price. This is what happened to the price. We've seen how the pig numbers dropped. The red line, just let your eyes follow the red line on that graph. That's the pork price in China. So the price more than doubled. It almost tripled. So take your current pork price and just imagine tomorrow you were getting triple that. Okay, so African swine fever is really bad if you've got it. But if everyone else has it and you don't, might not be so bad for the bank balance. So again, if you can keep it out of your farm, opportunities. That's just the sound numbers dropping from almost 40 million right down to 20 million, and then a slow build coming back up. And I think this one to me was the most surprising of all of them. That the first bar is China's pork production. The light blue section is the pigs they lost. Okay, so that light blue section is what was lost with African swine fever. One event, right? Compare that to the second bar. That's all of America, North America's pork production, the US. That's all of the US's pork production. The next one is all the pork that's traded around the world put together. Compare them in size to what China lost. The first green one is China's chicken population. How much smaller that is than pork. The US's chicken population, and then the global. So it kind of dwarfs what China lost. It's one virus. Then you can understand why the Americans are in complete panic about are they going to or are they not going to get it. And it's already in the Caribbean on more than one island. So it's on the doorstep and everyone's in panic mode. Okay, but it wasn't only pork that gets affected. The green line there is the pork price. You can see how that goes up like we saw in those previous graphs. Look at the red line. So the beef farmers were smiling about African swine fever. Poultry doesn't change much because I think poultry is just too quick to turn the taps on and say, let's make chickens. So price didn't change that much. But look what beef does. And then not only in China. So the red one is the Chinese one. But look at the yellow one is Spain, goes up. The grey one is Germany. The blue one is the US. All those guys that jumped on the bandwagon and exported made good money about that, good money from the exports, and created a shortage back in their own countries. And hence, back in their own countries, price adjusted. So you had a worldwide adjustment in the pork price. As a South African, our price didn't adjust because we weren't exporting. But what was nice was all of a sudden, all the imports, we get a lot of imports coming in from around the world. They all stopped. No longer were we battling with Canadian pork, no longer were we battling with German pork or Brazilian. It all stopped because there was a better price elsewhere. So but our market was protected for a while with not having oversupply. And not just meat, this is the soya bean price, right? The yellow one is the soya bean price in Brazil. It crashes, drops 30%. So you're a Brazilian farmer growing soya, and some guy's sick pig in China now makes you financially unviable because all of a sudden there's no demand for soya. Okay, so it's not just pigs, it's not just China, it's not just meat, it's the whole of agriculture gets affected. Okay, so what about us? In South Africa, we've had quite a few outbreaks already. Fortunately, very few commercial outbreaks, but we have had a few commercial outbreaks. 2 in the last, 3 years? 3 in the last 5 years. But if we had more commercial, we have many outbreaks outside of the commercial herds. But if you had more herds around you breaking, what effect would this have on you? So if your farm's affected, obviously that's the end of your farm. But what happens if a farm nearby is infected? Are you going to be put into the same quarantine zone as that guy? Is your farm going to be under quarantine? Are you going to maybe be infected because there's people contact between the farms? But it's going to be bad enough if you put into quarantine and you can't market pigs for 8 or 12 weeks. That's also going to do a lot of damage, and then your pigs are too heavy, and who wants them? And. What happens if distant farms are affected? Will your province, for example, maybe have travel restrictions or pig movement restrictions, put it that way? From a South African point of view, we have an outbreak and all of a sudden the borders are closed and then the exports stop, and South Africa sends quite a lot of pork to Namibia, and the Namibians quickly close the border, as they should, and that has a massive effect on our local market. The last one there is just the instability, reshuffling of the supply chain that we see all the time. Abattoir A normally buys from Farmer 1. And if Abattoir A all of a sudden decides he's going to buy from Farmer 3, there's complete chaos through the whole market. Because now what does Farmer 1 do with these pigs? He goes to Abattoir C and D, and then they shuffle. And then so there's a whole shuffle between everyone who's buying from who. And while they're doing that, the price is just talk down, talk down, talk down. So any instability causes that, but this is an example of that instability. I'll give you an example. So this is the South African pork price over the last, 7, 8 years. Data from SAPO, so it's fairly representative of what the market, isn't one market price, but fairly representative of the average market price. And don't worry about the numbers in the rands. What I want to show you is you can clearly see there's 3 massive troughs on that graph, right? There's 3 times that the bottom mark fell out the market completely and farmers were crying. The first one in 2018 was listeriosis. You'll remember the listeria chaos in South Africa. That's listeria. The second one, foot and mouth outbreak. Let's go back to listeria. There's no pork involved in this. Okay? Listeria came from polony, but there's no pork in the polony. So this is a chicken problem. That does that to the pork industry. The second drop is a foot and mouth outbreak in cattle in the northeastern part of the country. Pork price drops. Okay. The third one is a commercial herd breaking with African swine fever. You'd think now there's fewer pigs, there's going to be a price go up. Every time we've got a health issue, and it doesn't have to be a pig-specific health issue, just any kind of health issue, the price does that, and that's human. It hits the news. Listeria. All of a sudden, no one wants to buy polony. But now they think polony's pork, so then they don't want to buy bacon, and. Same with foot and mouth. People see on TV, there's cattle dying, blah, 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 blah. Price crashes. Also, borders are closed and so on. So these health issues have a massive effect on our market. And that comes at a time, this is the maize price. When the maize price is doing this, okay, it just keeps going. And is it going to stop? Don't know. We were talking about it at lunch. Everyone's talking about El Nino coming this year. Are we going to have a smaller crop? I mean, that price increase is coming off the back of South Africa having 4 years of record crops. So what happens with a dry year? But my point is it's getting harder and harder to farm. The last thing you want is a disease. What we do to see how profitable the farms are often is we divide the pork price by the maize price. Because maize is about 60% of your costs on the farm. It's an interesting way just of looking what's your profitability. So that red line there is 10 to 1. And that's kind of seen as the old days. If you were doing 10, you were making good money. We haven't seen 10 for a long time, as you could see there. But as that tracks down, it means pork is getting cheaper compared to maize. So there's less and less profits. I, for one, don't see this changing in the South African market. It's just too competitive. Zimbabwean market might be slightly different. Okay, so let's get down to the biosecurity. What's my time like? Good still. I can waffle. Okay. All right, so I divide biosecurity into two things. The diseases that you can't farm with. You get that disease, you're done. You've got to... Either all those pigs are going to die, or you've got to go and kill them, but you can't farm with it. All right. So those are the big nasties: the African swine fever, the foot and mouth disease, other exotic diseases. Okay. So some of these will be pigs die and you can't farm. Others will be your state vets come and kill your pigs for you, but you can't farm. So the implications there are slaughter out. You've normally got to incinerate those carcasses. In theory, African swine fever, in theory, people can eat that meat. It's not harmful at all. We can't, as humans, get African swine fever. I've only ever seen one case, and it was out of Uganda, where some of the pigs were recouped, call it. Some of the loss was recouped, and that pork was processed and it was put into the market. Every other scenario I've seen of African swine fever, the state forces all the pigs to be dealt with, whether it's burial, normally it's incineration or burial, one of the two, which is complete loss. So you may be able to recoup some, but don't count on it. Further implications, as I said earlier, are those quarantine zones. If you're in one of those, not a good place to be for your business. Movement restrictions has then an effect on the whole market. And then you get that public perception. People stop buying. I remember with China's break starting, WhatsApp videos of all these live, I don't know if you saw those things, they were horrible. Live pigs just being dumped from trucks into holes, and disgusting. And I mean, people see this and this isn't selling bacon, And then obviously closed borders. If you're sending pigs out the country and your border closes, all of a sudden you've got too many pigs, too much meat. So these are diseases that are protected by the national borders, except for African swine fever because it's endemic, right? So, but the exotic ones protected by the national borders, government restrictions. But at the end of the day, your own biosecurity is really important. Okay, is the government going to keep one of those diseases out? I'm not so sure. I think African governments have got other problems to deal with. I don't think too many of them are worried about PRRS. So your own biosecurity becomes important, and I'm gonna speak more about that. What's the value of those diseases? Depends what your farm's worth, but it's total loss, right? Okay, then you get the second category. These are diseases you don't have to farm with, but you can farm with. Okay, and these are the things like mycoplasma, APPs, swine dysentery. That list will go on forever. And these are things that many of you in the room will be farming with. Some of you in the room are lucky enough and aren't farming with. But you don't have to farm with these. Okay, these are things that you can get off your farm and you can farm without. I think sub-Saharan Africa, biggest benefit, biggest positive point of farming pigs in this part of the world is the pig density is incredibly low. I go to places like Holland quite often, and I actually spent some time with a vet in Holland a few years ago. We went around to his farms, and he sees a pig farm every day like I do. His furthest farm from his house was 15 kilometers. We go to the farm's farrow house, and we drive through 3 other farms, pig farms, to get to the weaners, 3 other farms to get to the growers. That's the pig density. Where here, pigs are far apart. That's a big benefit. So we can, you say to those guys, try and farm without mycoplasma, and they just, come on, what your neighbor's got, you've got. We've got that benefit. You can farm pathogen-free, specific pathogen-free. We've got farms in South Africa now getting to 30 years SPF status. So they've been able to keep these diseases out for 30 years already, so it is possible. Often when we go through the list with European vets and say, these are the diseases we don't have, you often get the look of, you freaking crazy Africans, you don't have the tests, because some of the diseases we don't have, people can't actually believe. So what are the implications of these diseases? As I said, you can farm with them. Reduced growth rates, so your pig's using the energy from the feed it's eating to fuel its immune system instead of growing, or it's feeling a bit fevered every other day, so it's not wanting to eat that much, it's not feeling great. Increased death rates, of course, if you've got disease on the farm. Even if it's well controlled, your death rates are going to be slightly higher, and if it's uncontrolled, it's going to be properly high. Increased feed conversion ratios, again, using that maize pip that it's eating to fight disease instead of to grow. Increased medication costs, vaccine, antibiotics, and management inputs. I'm always amazed at the difference when I consult on a SPF farm to when I consult on a standard health farm, on the growers specifically. The guys on the grower farms are walking around on a standard farm, walking around all day looking for 6 pigs and injecting. The guy on the SPF farm walking around adjusting feeders, making sure the wastage is tackled. Because he doesn't have 6 pigs to look for, so he spends his time on something else. Where on the standard health farm, the priority, the urgent, important red block we saw this morning, that's the pig that's going to die. All right. Now, on the other farm, that's not there, so he tackles the next thing. All right, so this one is protected solely by your own biosecurity. And I'm going to chat more about that. So what do you need? The first thing is you need a fence. Like a fish farmer needs a dam, a pig farmer needs a fence. I've never heard of a fish farmer moaning that, oh, this dam, I have to go and build a dam and it's going to cost me money. He knows he's got to build a dam. And that's what pig farmers should be. There should be no question about do I or don't I need a fence. You need a fence, all right? Otherwise, all of these other things are going to bite you. It's not if, it's when it's going to bite you. So that's the very first thing you put around a piggery before you finish building it. It needs a fence. And that fence has to be very specific. It's got to be pig-proof. That's the most important, pig-proof. Pigs can get in anywhere. You guys know pigs. One of the old vets I work with always says it's the most destructive creature in Africa. Because they are. Give them something, they'll break it for you. They can break fences. They can dig. Those noses are built for digging. So it's got to be a pig-proof fence. And that's a diamond mesh. It's not an electric fence. Pigs run straight, flat out through an electric fence, no problem. It's a diamond mesh fence, and it's concreted into the ground. That's the absolute only way to stop a pig getting through a fence. Otherwise, you go to the cost of a nice fence, it looks nice, it's not helping. Pigs get underneath it. You have to stop that feral pig, or that warthog, or your neighbor's pig that's running around outside getting in. And then second comes the person-proof fence. So that can be one fence. Often we put up, especially in ASF positive areas, we'll have a double fence, 1.5 meters apart. One's pig-proof, one's human. Human one's normally just 1.8 meters and electric, and the pig-proof one is diamond mesh and concrete. But the person fence is as important as the pig-proof one, because people can also transmit. They're also in contact with pigs outside, and unfortunately, these days, if you don't have a person fence, you also don't have pigs. So they get carried off, unfortunately. And the guy carrying off the pig doesn't shower into your farm, he just comes in. So you've got this sealed unit around for the fencing, but then you've got to look at what are the entry points. How do we get through that fence? And the very best farms do not have a gate. And that sounds crazy, but I've got many farms where there is no gate. There's a lawnmower inside that stays inside. And all trucks, feed trucks, everything, pig trucks will move on the ring road around the unit. Nothing goes in. All right, that's the best you can do. If that's not possible and a vehicle has to come through a gate, then the gate has to be locked. all the time. And it gets really tricky on how you do it, but what do you do with that vehicle that comes in? How do you clean that vehicle? And that you've got to spend time looking at. How's that vehicle disinfected? Who's it done by? Is it effective? What does the driver of that vehicle do? If that driver gets out in the piggery, what's the point of all the showers and everything else? This guy might be delivering feed to other farms, who knows? So best one, if a vehicle has to come in, best is driver's not allowed out. Guys stick a sticker on the door, can't get out, either break the seal, and the vehicle is disinfected as well as it can be, which is always a bit of a question, and then the vehicle goes in. And hopefully that's only an internal vehicle that gets used on the farm somewhere else, not an external vehicle that goes into the outside world and you've got no control over, that might be going to another farm like a feed truck, for example. Feed trucks over the fence. So that's the one entry point. The next entry point is the shower, and I can talk for an hour on showers, but the shower has to be done properly. Just having a window dressing shower is a joke. All right, if you're going to go to the effort of do it properly. So it's a one-way shower. I don't go in there, get undressed, shower, come back to where I was standing, get into clean clothes. I've just cross-contaminated. All right, one-way shower. Everything's off here. Through the shower, get out that side of the shower. Don't underestimate how comfortable that shower must be. If people don't like doing something, they don't do it. All right? You guys are sitting here. Someone's on your farm. They might be showering in or out now. If that shower's got cold water, who's showering? If that shower's dark and dingy, who's showering? Okay? So the modern nice farms I go to, it's underfloor heat. It's a much better shower than I've got at my house, by far, 100 times. Underfloor heating, heated towel rails, the whole story. Fancy. Now, you can argue about overkill, but I think the point stands. Make it comfortable. Soap, clean stuff, dry towels, clean, nice light, and a one-way system. Then the dry change. So dry change could be instead of the shower. At least the person leaves shoes and stuff outside. But and you're probably dealing with, I don't know, maybe that does 3/4 of the job. The best farms have got a shower, but externally there's a dry change. So I would stop my car like 500 meters or 2 kilometers from the farm, at the farm's entry, and that's as far as I can go. From there, I have to leave everything there, including wedding ring and cell phone, and ladies' earrings and necklaces. Everything gets left there, get into their clothes, their boots, either walk or get transported with an internal vehicle to the showers and then in. So you've got that extra barrier. And then you've got deliveries, right? Some things have to come into farms. You've got all your consumables, so you've got to look at how those things come in. Every single thing that has to come in on the farm can be made safe. All right. First rule is bring as little as possible in. So a full set of tools. Someone's coming in to do something, he uses your tools. All the basics, right? If he's coming with some specialized piece of machinery, it's an electrician with some funny machine. Then you've got to think a bit about how we get that clean. Most things can be cleaned with liquid. Electronics gets a bit tricky. Electronics would then be wiped down, and we generally use either UV cabinets, but you've got to watch how they're made, that the light really gets in everywhere, or formalin cabinets, formalin tablet in there, and after that thing's wiped down and it's gone through the cabinet, I don't think it's perfect, but it's low risk. But then only the things that have to. All right. First prize is nothing comes in. Things that can be wiped down with disinfectant, left in a bath, things like that, those are easy. And then we generally have a holding area. So all incoming product, whether it's medicine, whether it's your consumables, things like catheters or light bulbs or whatever's coming in, we generally have a holding area. So it'll come in, go onto a rack. The outside guy will just put it through the door. This guy will pick it up, put it on the rack, spray it down, disinfect it, and then we hold it there for 3 days, and then it's only allowed out. There's the odd exception, semen coming in from the genetic company, things like that bypass. But we tackle them in other ways, making sure we know where it comes from. All right, so you've got the fence sorted and the perimeter and what's coming in there. The one we didn't mention was the pigs. Pigs also have to come in. And if anything can infect another pig, it's a pig, right? That's your very most effective thing. So where you're getting your pigs from goes without saying, okay? If you're buying in pigs, you have to fully trust the guy you're buying from that health is better or equal to yours, and that his biosecurity is better or equal to yours. Otherwise, you're going to break. You're buying from a chancer and he's taking chances, then you may as well take chances. What's the difference? Because as soon as he breaks, you break. Anyone upstream from you, as soon as they break, it's going to roll down to you. So where you're getting your pigs from is super important. How do they come in? Have those pigs been exposed on the road, coming through to you? Which routes does the guy drive? Where does he stop? We've had many incidents like that. Everything's all fine. This is all great. Meantime, truck stopping in the village next to pigs to buy Coke, and he does it every time, and you get exposure. So you've got to look a bit deeper. Where your vehicle's moving, what time of the day we're moving. In South Africa, we have a lot of pigs moving on the main highways going to the abattoirs early morning. So the genetic companies just avoid early morning. So pigs will be moved later afternoon, quieter times. You've got to look at that. How do they go out? Fence straight through the loading ramp, straight through the fence, gates on it. So that the person loading the pigs doesn't touch the truck. He takes them to the edge. The guy on the truck takes them further. No contact between the two. Okay, you can have a nice clean herd, but if that truck's infected, what now? That truck's been to the abattoir. Was it washed properly? Wasn't it? You got to be careful. And then who are your neighbors? You can do very little about your neighbors, but you need to know who they are and where they are and how many pigs they've got, and you can have discussions with them and see if you've got a high risk. You've got to put more things into place. You can't change your neighbor, but you can increase your biosecurity. All right, then people are a problem. They have to come in. We need staff. Have they had contact with pigs on other farms? Problem I see often is the people working on the piggeries, when they leave their piggery, they're the pigs in their community. They are the pig specialist. Okay, he goes home somewhere for a weekend. There's a sick pig in the area. That guy needs help. Who's he going to ask? He's going to ask this guy. He works on a commercial piggery. He's got to know everything about pigs. Okay, so you've got to watch out for who you're having contact with on the weekends. And it's about following rules. We've got a 72-hour rule. If you've been in contact with pigs 72 hours, you can't come in. And then I say they communicate, because it's the first time someone comes to you and says, hey, I made a mistake, I saw pigs on the weekend, and you send him home without pay for 3 days, then you're never going to hear it again. So we try and keep open channels. I get a call on a Sunday night often. Doc, I went hunting the weekend, I shot the warthog, what now? And I say, sorry, pal. And then we just divert them somewhere else. Work in the office for 3 days, cut grass, make a plan, but don't touch pigs. Right? Then at least you keep hearing about it. Feed source, we're running out of time, but feed source, really important. We've had 2 cases now in Uganda, African swine fever, feed sample, PCR, positive. Okay, so proven that it's come from the feed mill. Inspect the feed mill, people having lunch, sitting on the bags, having a pork chop from yesterday, wiping hands on the bags, that bag goes to a farm. So know your feed source. Where's it coming from? How safe are they? That's something we can also speak for 3 hours about. And then I think the consumables we chatted about there. Second, last one is visitors. No visitors. Okay? A few people as possible in there. Only who has to go in there. And then they must understand biosecurity and the risk to you and the 72 hours. And then the last one there is the finger pointing back at yourself. I see that too often. Everyone must apply by all the rules. But the owner, on a Sunday morning, and his 2 little grandchildren, they don't carry ASF. They walk through the gate. No problem, because it can't be me, right? So the other thing about you is everyone looks up. And if the guy up top isn't doing the rules, then when he's not there, I don't do the rules. Okay, so the guy at the top needs to set the rules, and everyone will follow what that person's doing. Who manages this? I think the answer is everyone manages it. You need someone in charge. You need someone that calls the shots and makes the rules and talks to people and trains people. But at the end of the day, everyone on that farm needs to understand that they need to manage it, all of them, because everyone's salary, everyone working there tomorrow won't have a job. My Malawian client, the farm shut down. 6 months, no one had pay. Okay, after ASF. It's only then did they take it seriously. So I'll finish with that. For biosecurity to truly work, it must be a way of life. It can't be sometimes, it can't be window dressing, and it can't be applied to only some. All right, it's got to be a way of life. What you do normally every day, you don't even notice you're doing it, then it'll work. Thanks very much.